However, it's also true, so having said that, you know, this distinction remains, it's also very much the case that the boundary is being eroded. And one of the things that's been very prevalent in the last few years of discussion of fantastic literature is precisely endless talks about, you know, you know, is it fantasy, is it science fiction, the new blurry boundaries, and so on and so forth. And some people, particularly those within an SF tradition, have seen this as tremendously pathological and problematic. And I want to, because of their suspicion about this mystification, and I want to say that this new, I hope, suspicion about the cognition effect might allow us to get to a place where that blurring of the boundary is perfectly legitimate. Now, it might be claimed that the continual, you might go further, you might claim that the continual efforts to parcel over some separate science fictional realm of estranging fiction that is corralled by a nostalgic, neo-Fabian ideological conception of legitimate and illegitimate modes of cognition has stunted the development of a radical, aesthetically estranging and narratologically rigorous literature of literalized metaphor and alterity, a fantastic literature worthy of the name, or not, maybe not. You might say, probably much more likely, that both the boundaries between the two subgenres and their breaching are both constraining and enabling in different ways at different times. It's a very prosaic, but frankly the most likely position, I would say. What I would hope is that the shift in attention can be from these kind of conventional epiphenomenal distinctions that have long been held as definitional to that shared fundamental alterity. But it may be, and I'll draw this to a close with this, that ultimately that it is strategically inadequate at this point to insist on this shared substance. I've attempted to undermine the specificity of science fiction by interrogating it. But to blur it even more, it may be that we need to re-respect those unstable specifics all over again and approach them from another direction. Because to continue the project of theorizing a conjoined science fiction fantasy, science fiction, which has long had a tendency to hegemonize the conversation, might have to be temporarily excluded. And it may be time for theory to turn its attention to the neglected half of the dyad. I think it would be extremely both, you know, politically and aesthetically productive for much more rigorous theoretical attention to the traditionally scorned other of science fiction. I think it's time for that attention to turn its gaze to fantasy itself. So I'll draw to a close there. Thank you. Thank you. We have, I think, quite a lot of time for questions. Is it just me or is it really hot in here? Oh, it's hot. Okay, good. Not just me. We have. So I won't be offended if anyone sneaks out, you know. But on the assumption that some people would like to, if anyone has any questions or contributions or disagreement or anything. Yes.
I might mention that your reduction finally that science fiction is what science fiction writers write comes down basically what John Campbell defines science fiction as what science fiction editors publish. not totally new insight.
No, nothing. I don't think anything I've said is new. I think the best I can do is to have arranged it like spillikins in a slightly different order. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'll play off that. You mentioned sort of the solidarity between pulp and the avant-garde and literary non-realism. And I'm wondering if it seems like editors are more willing to publish. Literary journalists see more things that are that you would have only seen something like Fantasy Magazine 40 years ago. There's not an expectation for just pure realism in the real.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way that you now have science fiction fantasy writers writing realistic things that get published in Asimov's because that's a fantasy writer wrote it. Do you think that editorial change further blurs the boundaries in the problematic way you're talking about, or does it actually facilitate this larger interrogation?
I strongly suspect that can people hear the question? Yeah, you okay? Yeah, I strongly suspect that these things are cyclical. Basically, I think at the moment we're at a time when, at the level of production, there is a certain opening up to a certain, although every time these things open up, there's also then a rearguard action, and it doesn't take much to find kind of splenetic editorials decrying this fact. As I say, there was one just recently about the debate about the Science Fiction Poetry Association just reran this whole thing. But at the moment, I think it is true that I sort of tentatively think we're in a fairly sort of open time for these kind of connections and so on. And I also think that at the level of production in kind of mainstream, in inverted commas, fiction or whatever, there's a generation of writers that have come out of reading genre fiction and who are much more relaxed about using some of its furniture than their kind of literary antecedents, but who don't nonetheless write within, the tradition of science fiction or fantasy, but nor do they have that kind of sense of not wanting to get their fingers dirty, So and that's leading to kind of interesting hybrid fiction. So I would say somebody like David Mitchell, for example. David Mitchell's books are certainly not realist, but they're not generic in the sense that they don't smell to me like like a lot of SF and fantasy. Every time I come to a book, I kind of smell its bum like a dog. What kind of book are you? And Mitchell does not smell like My Tribe to me, but it's a very interesting, good experiment. I think it will probably go back again. I think that these things, as I say, they go up and down. They're very cyclical. I also think when I talk about the kind of connections between the non-realist avant-garde and so on, I'm talking also not just at the question of production, although I'm very interested, I'm very sort of excited by people that are willing to kind of use those techniques within genre. I'm also talking about at the level of theorization, at the level of criticism, and there is this move towards considering a lot of this stuff pulp modernism. And I think that for me the category of pulp modernism is a very useful and fecund category, and it seems to me that despite, just as an example, just to sort of pick one example out of the air, despite his own sort of asinine kind of Luddism about modernism, Lovecraft's own work, H.P. Lovecraft's own work, is very directly related to the same kind of thing that Joyce was doing. It is to do with a kind of fractured new attempt to conceptualize an inconceivable totality of the modern world in the aftermath of a total crisis, or in the throes of a total crisis, a kind of cultural crisis. So the fact that he wrote this incredibly crass piss take of Eliot's Wasteland, but his own, this is where it's important to distinguish author's own opinion. The fact that an author is stupid and wrong about their own work doesn't mean they're not doing interesting stuff, you know what I mean? So I would also be very interested in seeing some of those connections drawn out at the level of criticism and at the level of theory and so on. So at the moment, to answer your question, I'm kind of broadly cheerful and optimistic, but I don't this happened before. It happened with the New Wave in the 70s. It happened with it happened to a certain limited extent with cyberpunk. This kind of thing happens.